Facebook, and YouTube. So I want to thank every one of you who is watching. And please feel free to add any questions, and we'll try to answer those toward the end of the interview. So welcome to everyone. And Daniel, a special welcome to you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. And so why don't we start with a little bit of your background? Certainly apropos of your company, our early training from your mother, I presume. Where did you grow up and go to school and do that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I grew up in West Los Angeles, actually. Was born in DC, actually, when my dad was in medical school at Georgetown. Then when he graduated Georgetown, they moved back here and spent my whole life in Los Angeles. Loved Southern California. And I think, for me, my parents were really amazing role models. But my mom was a lawyer, my dad's a doctor, and I loved a lot of what they did. But I always saw my grandfather as my inspiration from a work perspective. He was an entrepreneur, had served in the Army, and then immediately afterwards started a business that he built into what in the 70s was the largest privately owned real estate company in the country, and just was really a really amazing human being, family man, community person, but also just an incredible entrepreneur. And he really built something that helped people. And as much as I also see my parents as role models, I think I saw what my grandfather was able to build as something that I really wanted to kind of model my life after.
So tell us a little bit about your grandfather. We didn't know any of that. This is a new revelation. Please, that sounds exciting, interesting. Sounds like a heck of a role model.
Yeah, he was really an amazing man. So he served in World War II and was injured. He stepped on a landmine while serving in Europe. And actually, they thought they'd have to amputate both of his legs. And after 7 months of rehabilitation in the hospital, he ended up working himself through walking, and to the point where he didn't even have to use a wheelchair, but had to use a cane. Due to some of his, shrapnel left all over his body. And he had actually always wanted to be a chemical engineer, but that, being a chemical engineer required a lot of standing, which was really difficult if you had all those injuries. And the place he really wanted to work was Dow, which had at the time, a reputation for some amount of anti-Semitism, and he felt between the injury and the kind of cultural issues that it just might be a difficult career for him. So he decided to go out on his own with his brother and start building houses.
Fantastic.
It's really an amazing story. And then all of a sudden, 30 years later, he was the largest privately
I like this. All of a sudden, 30 years later, right?
Yeah, there's a lot in between.
I'm sure there is. Yeah.
And he was really, I think the thing to me that he did that was just most amazing is, he was an amazing entrepreneur, but he also at the same time always focused on, having an eye on his family and his community and doing things to give back and help people.
In the community. And so here in Southern California?
Yeah, in Southern California, growing up in West LA also. And he was, just an amazing.
So I don't want to give away the story, but what made you decide to come to Pomona?
So I loved, Los Angeles, California, West Coast, also just very close to my family. And I was looking at what are the premier institutions in, Southern California and California in general. So I applied to Pomona, Claremont, a number of the 5C colleges, Stanford, Berkeley, and I think I loved Pomona. I wanted a small school where I could really get personal attention from teachers. I never had a class with more than 30 teachers. I picked my favorite professor and did an independent study with him. And at what other serious institution can you just select your favorite professor and get a one-on-one opportunity to have in-depth discussions with them? That's right. So for me, it was just such an amazing opportunity to be with amazing people, but also in a setting that was small enough that you could really get something out of the people you're there with.
What was your major?
It was at first public policy and economics, and actually I ended up transferring to economics because that required an internship. And around that time, I started my business, and I didn't have time both to start a business and also to do the internship. So I ended up transitioning.
So what gets a good student interested in starting their own business? How did that work?
So I loved my classes. I had some really great professors, but I also looked at my grandfather as a role model and thought if I really want to build a business, I want to gain experience that's going to be...
Yeah, that 30 years is going to take time, right?
Yeah. Exactly. You have to do something along the way to build it. And I thought it would be great to get some amount of experience in real world building a business. And I was a little bit impatient not to wait to do it until we graduated. And one winter break with a good friend of mine just started selling medical supplies out of my parents' garage. It turned out we had a good source through his father for latex gloves. There was a lot, it was an increased utilization of latex gloves because more dentists were using them. In the past, they really hadn't a long time ago. So we figured we didn't need to really make money. We could just get experience selling at a very low margin, delivering the gloves ourselves, delivering the face masks ourselves, and just that it would be good experience with how it all comes together. And that if it turned into a business, that would be great. And if not, we were going to graduate college, and then we'd have had like real experience of like how to build a business. So that's kind of how it got started, almost just as a pilot.
What happened to that business? So is it you started your own company doing this, or was it just kind of ad hoc? Or
yeah, so we ended up building it over the next 10 years to a company with about 10 million in revenue, about 40 employees, distributing about 10,000 different dental products. So it was a great experience. While we were at Pomona, we were doing it just a couple days a week. But as we sold these like latex gloves and face masks to dentists, they would call us back and ask for drill bits or anesthetics. So we would turn to Google and say like, where can I buy some face masks? And then we'd have 2 products and then 5 products, and slowly added like a list of at first consumable products, and then like a larger supplies for dentists. They use more consumable products, so it made sense to tailor our business more towards them than to my dad's an infectious disease doctor. He doesn't really use much stuff in the office.
Right.
So we ended up developing a full line dental supply company. We really launched it in more earnest after we graduated. I ended up graduating in 2003. And then by 2009, we were doing about 10 million in revenue with about 40 employees, selling about 10,000 SKUs of dental supplies.
Impressive.
Thank you. It
Really,
was
really. No, seriously, that's congratulations. That's a story all by itself. But obviously the story doesn't end there. What happened? Okay, so that business, did you sell it, or what happened with that?
Unfortunately, so around 2009 is when the recession started to get bad.
I heard about that. Yeah.
And I think we also made all the wrong decisions going into the recession as far as how to handle it. We were young and very invincible feeling. So we were also the lower priced dental supply company. So we saw a great opportunity to, as what we thought would be a somewhat mild recession hit, to have dentists be more price conscious and to have our offering be more attractive to dentists. So we borrowed a lot of money, expanded our offering, did a lot of marketing, started to grow even more, and then the recession got really bad. And the short story is we didn't cut quickly enough. We're over leveraged and losing too much money. And by the time we realized how bad it was already too late, and we ended up going out of business in 2011.
There's no better way to learn.
Yeah,
right? That would
absolutely.
be my argument. So I mean that if you don't want to, I want to
Sure.
pause on that, because I really think it's an incredible and important thing to learn from. Because we get a lot of these kind of discussions, and people say, well, what happens if it fails? Well, there's just my guess is you learn. You learn a whole lot, and you probably learn a lot more than you would have had you succeeded.
Absolutely.
Because you're now forced to make other kinds of decisions. What were the biggest lessons you learned from all this?
That's a great question. I think a lot of these lessons have helped me be a much more successful entrepreneur now. And I think, I might not have been where I am now at all, or have a company that's still thriving if I hadn't learned the lessons I learned before. So I think I learned some things about myself as a manager, and also some things about, just running a business. About myself, I learned I was not valuing, people and relationships nearly enough. I was always like a very data-oriented, analytical person that thought if you had, if a person in a role had the right tools and resources and data, they should just be able to go and make all the right decisions if they have the right level of experience. And I did not sufficiently value like the building and growing of the personal relationship from a manager to a supervisor, because for me that hadn't been important in my role. So I didn't really see that as important for others. And I think I didn't do a good enough job in my building of a team, building of like a real culture that I think helped people grow. Because I kind of relied on people to do that for themselves, because that's how I'd always done it. Is I always just did it for myself. But that's not an appropriate way to be the leader of a company. So I think that was an important personal lesson that I learned that has helped me be a much better manager and leader of my current company. And I think from a company perspective, I learned to really focus on what we're doing well and do more of that. I think one of the problems for us in terms of is not just that we didn't cut fast enough, or that we borrowed too much money, but we were really diversified away from things that were making us the most profit. So we were doing quite well selling consumable dental supplies, kind of what had been our start. We had name brand versions, private label versions that were higher margin. But when you're already selling these consumable products to a dentist and they want to buy an X-ray machine, it's very hard to say no as a small business to someone waving a $50,000 check saying, I want to buy an X-ray machine.
Right.
But then you have to hire a technician, and you have to buy a van, and you have to, build all this infrastructure to service it. Right. And we got so excited about the, dollar opportunities and revenue opportunities.
The big shiny thing, yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
That we were teaching classes on how to place dental implants, and we were installing X-ray machines, and we were doing so many different things that, as a much more mature company, I think would have been amazing opportunities in and of themselves.
Sure, Siemens.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But as a small business, we were just doing too much.
Right.
And if we'd focused more on what we knew we could do well and make money doing, then I think we could have weathered the bad times better, and also knew better how to handle what was coming. So I think that was a real big lesson. And then I think also just in general, I've just learned to become a more conservative business person as far as cash flow and cash management, and that, every business is going to go to business because they run out of money. It's like how every person dies because of, lack of oxygen to the brain. There's only one reason businesses go out of business. It's like out of cash.
It's always cash.
There's no other reason. So, I mean, there's other reasons that you need to be valuable to customers, and, but in the end, like if we don't succeed, it'll be because we, ran out of cash before we could make our success happen. So I think I've learned to be a little less aggressive and more conservative. And I think that especially in an area like healthcare, I think that's suited me really well in my current environment. I think there's some areas where it might be better to, just, double down on everything at each additional step. But for me, that, I don't see that as the path I would like to take, and where I think you can have the most reliable path towards success.
Great experience and great lessons. So that experience, and then what got you, and how did you get together and do? Was Ready Set Food the next thing after that?
So I had to take a little bit of a break from entrepreneurship.
Okay.
It was amazing, and I love it, and I knew I'd get back to it eventually. But I was also getting married at the time, and was about to have some kids, and thought it would be nice to at least have some career on my resume that I could fall back on. Eventually. So I, the next 6 or 7 years, did a series of strategic planning and internal consulting roles. I first worked for a business school professor. I was at the time at Anderson getting an MBA when my company went out of business, and I ended up going to work for a business school professor who was the managing director of a small private equity firm. So I was kind of an internal consultant for his small portfolio companies that were all very similar to my dental supply company. So it was a good kind of first job. At age 30,
experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Most MBA students don't bring that level of knowledge and experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I ended up doing a similar kind of role at the Wonderful Company. They have an internal strategy group led by Steve Howe, which is just fantastic, and took a lot of those kind of internal consulting skills and translated it to a much larger scale. Did some really interesting work for their portfolio companies, and then was hired by their portfolio company at Telflora to run sales operations and strategy for them. All the time, eventually, I think I knew I would want to do something entrepreneurial, but I think had not found the right opportunity, and also wanted to get a little more kind of corporate experience, because I think I also learned a lot of, as much as I did learn from having a business that went under, I also learned a fair amount from having, a real system of how you do employee reviews in a corporate environment. And I think there's some amount of that while I don't want to copy it, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from best practices of what people do in a corporate environment. And then, I thought of other business ideas along the way and explored them and not found them to be good opportunities. And two and a half years ago, my nephew developed a number of severe food allergies. So he is anaphylactic to peanut and egg and dairy and sesame and a number of tree nuts. And after we found out he was anaphylactic, when he first ate those allergens at 7 months, I was talking to my brother-in-law, who's a doctor, and we're just thinking about was there something he could have done to have prevented my nephew from getting these food allergies? Because my brother-in-law had heard that there had been clinical trials showing that if you feed allergenic foods to babies starting from a very young age and do it frequently, that it can prevent food allergies. There'd been one that was famous that I'd heard about a little bit, that they started giving peanut powder to babies at 4 months of age, did it 3 times a week for 4 years, and found that it prevented 81% of peanut allergies. So that led to a number of other clinical trials, but it just got us thinking there seems to be real evidence that you can prevent not all, but most severe food allergies. And it doesn't require a chemical or a drug, but just giving the food to babies early and frequently. It also struck us, though, that both having a number of small kids that feeding multiple allergenic foods multiple times per week in the right dose to a 4-month-old just wouldn't have been possible with any of our kids. They just weren't eating lots of food reliably at 4 months of age. Maybe you start feeding solids at 4 or 5 months, but there's a big difference between when you start trying to get a little bit of oatmeal in there and when you're feeding peanut butter and egg and dairy and Brazil nut and hazelnut and all that stuff. So when we looked at the clinical trials, we saw they actually had the same problem in the trials themselves, that the largest clinical trial had 1,300 participants and more than half of them dropped out just because it was too hard to feed their baby the allergenic foods on a regular basis. And you only saw a significantly statistical result in the per protocol group. So in the people who weren't able to comply, you didn't see any benefit. So it showed both that it's really possible to prevent 70 to 80% of food allergies, but that it wasn't just hard. It wouldn't have been hard just for us. It was hard even in a clinical trial with the support of doctors and nurses and with people that volunteered for the clinical trial.
I appreciate that, and I think that it's obviously clearly a worrisome thing for new parents, and I certainly appreciate that. But in fact, the clinical data is pretty sketchy. I have looked at the clinical data. I've spent a great deal of time actually looking for that clinical data, and actually looking at the recommendations for the American Institute of Allergy and from the American Institute of Allergy. They don't recommend that sort of thing. They say start solid foods at 4 months.
Yes.
And just be very thoughtful and very careful. Don't feed whole peanuts. And as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that with peanuts and nut allergies, there is some evidence, and I emphasize some. But for the other allergenics, there's really no evidence that I saw. Maybe you have that evidence and see it, but I have not seen any evidence that doing this sort of protocol has any effect.
It's a great question. So the most common trial that people know about is the LEAP trial, which was just peanut, and also just on babies with eczema. So the most commonly known,
because they're the high risk babies. Right?
Exactly. So the most commonly agreed upon utilization of early allergen introduction that I think everyone would agree on is that babies with eczema have to get peanuts early and frequently.
Correct.
That's what the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines says.
WebMD says it. Yeah, there's a lot of agreement. Right?
Exactly, there's a lot of agreement. That was the earliest trial that most of these guidelines are based on. But in actually every other country that has guidelines, UK, Canada, Australia, they recommend peanut and egg to all babies starting from 4 months of age, and that's because there's not just the LEAP trial. We're behind getting our guidelines up to date with the kind of entire body of evidence. Now you may have some people who say, there's problems with different trials. Let's walk through them and talk about the problems and the benefits of each one. But there is definitely evidence that early introduction for other allergens works, and that also it works for a general population. So when you look at the other two trials that the other countries like UK, Canada, Australia base their guidelines on, the EAT trial is one, and the PETITE trial is the other. So in the PETITE trial, they introduced egg white to babies with eczema only. So that was, again, just the high-risk babies, but it was egg, and found a 79% rate of food allergy prevention. So there weren't any issues with compliance. They just did straight egg introduction to babies with eczema and found very good results. So I think we can also very conclusively say that for peanut and egg for babies with eczema, it's clearly the right thing to do. Then the third trial you look at is the EAT trial. Looked at multiple different allergens, and they had some problems. I mentioned they had a huge problem with compliance. And then as a result of a problem with compliance, it's also not powered sufficiently. But you did see across multiple different food allergens a 67% decrease in food allergies when you look at the group that was compliant throughout the entire period. And that was a general population study. So
what was the comparison? Compared to what? 67% decrease compared to what?
Compared to avoidance.
So was this just babies in the general population?
Babies in the general population.
So that's every other. That's it's not just avoidance. It's just everything.
Well, they had the control group avoided. So they broke that 1,300 babies into two groups. The control group avoided, and then the test group was fed multiple allergens multiple times per week, starting at 4 months of age for 3. That one was for 6 months.
6 months.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And especially given the compliance problems, it wasn't then sufficiently powered in the general population to determine individual levels of food allergy prevention. But in our minds, that really just speaks to the compliance issue. That
was the problem.
Yeah, and that's actually why we see such a need for our product is that you may have a doubt if milk has enough data to say that milk should be included. I'll tell you that there's a really great observational trial that looked at 10,000 kids that showed really good data that like early milk introduction is beneficial. It's not as good as the LEAP trial for sure. But I think our medical board of advisors feels like between the the LEAP trial, the EAT trial, the PETITE trial, the observational trials, the fact that multiple different countries have guidelines that say peanut and egg and other allergens starting at 4 months, that it is, and also given that there's no downside to giving those allergenic foods to babies who don't have eczema. That
No, I agree with that. It's not going to cause any harm.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think like everyone would agree, or everyone that we talk to would agree that like it's clearly true, peanut and egg for eczema. And I think that our medical team feels like the preponderance of the evidence would, and the lack of a downside otherwise, would tell you you should give just as many allergens to everyone from as early an age and as frequently as possible.
No question. So why a product? I mean, I can feed my baby or whatever. I don't have any of them, but whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Why do I need a product for that?
So you absolutely don't need a product. And our goal is not to tell every baby that they all need to use Ready Set food. Our goal is to tell every baby or every parent that their baby needs to eat allergens early and frequently. But that we know that even in the context of the clinical trial, with the support of the trial and people who volunteered for a trial, they had really bad compliance problems. So that there's clearly a need for some significant portion of the population to need help. And we think that's probably 70 to 80%, if in the clinical trial it was more than 50. So we think what does it mean to help parents do that? Part of it is education. So we provide a lot of education on our website. We provide a lot of tools for pediatricians to use to help educate patients about the guidelines and about the clinical trials. But there's also just a physical problem of like, some parents don't want to feed their babies solids at 4 months of age. There's lots of parents who only want to do breastfeeding and don't want to introduce solids until after 6 months. There's other parents who only want to do baby-led weaning. So they want to let the baby choose what they're eating and you don't want to force something on them. There's all sorts of things that get in the way. Right. So we say, look, by all means, if you can do this yourself, do it. The most important thing is just to feed your baby the allergens. Yeah, but if you need help, we want to make it really, really easy so that every baby, especially the ones with eczema, can get allergens early and frequently.
I noticed on your website, you talk about your products, I want to say boast, but maybe you do, maybe you don't, about them being non-GMO. Why? You knew that question was coming.
Yeah, and we deal with this occasionally. Like, look, I don't feel like that's an important characteristic.
So why do you do it?
It's an important marketing.
You're talking about yes, it's for marketing, but it's not science-based.
Correct.
So you're talking about advising parents, advising doctors, and you're advising them anti-science information. How do you justify that?
It's a good question. I mean, so we don't justify because we're not telling them that we see that's better. We're just saying that that's a quality of our product. So for people who value that quality, that's the quality we have. We also have, we're organic. That's also something that
question, right?
I also see, when you look at the data, there's very limited data that it matters. If anything,
there's no data that it matters. And that's different.
Yes,
that's
it is
very different.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm not going to let you off on this one.
Please.
I want to pursue this because I am concerned about. I mean, I think, I'm willing to go along with you on the introduction of allergens. There's enough, quantitative data. There's nothing probably harmful about it. But in fact, organic food is dangerous. All of the recalls recently have happened because of organic foods not having high enough temperatures in their fertilizer to kill the bacteria. Yeah. So I would argue that supporting organic foods is not only bad science, it really sends the wrong message of which one of your goals that you stated was educating parents and educating pediatricians.
Yep. So I agree with you from a theoretical perspective that it would be much better if every company that made products made them not organic and made them with GMOs and told parents you are wrong. The fact that you want organic.
Well, there's no GMO peanut. It doesn't exist.
Exactly. So and that tells you how much of a marketing.
There's no GMO milk. It doesn't exist.
Right. So
where's their GMO eggs?
So the question is
so this is a marketing ploy.
Absolutely. But I think, for us, it's important to meet consumers with where they're at. And I would love if we had the budget also to educate them on why they didn't need to be organic and didn't need to be non-GMO. But we only have a limited capability to educate, and we have a big haul to educate people on early allergen introduction and on food allergy prevention. And I wish we weren't in a state where people felt like it was an important thing to buy products. But we know from our focus groups that we wouldn't have the traction we have now, and we probably wouldn't be in business if it wasn't. So I wish we had the funds to do what you want.
No, good answer. Thank you. No, I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And I think it's important to understand what the value, what the non-value is. I mean, that's actually one of my problems. I mean, I know you spent a lot of time with the wonderful company. Same kind of argument.
Absolutely.
A lot of the stuff they produce, it's not your product, not your stuff, and I don't expect you to defend it, is really sort of non-scientific. And I worry about that. I worry about it a lot. As a science education institution, one of our goals has to be to provide science-based businesses. And I do emphasize the science-based.
Absolutely.
And I'm concerned, again, this is not your job to fix the problem. And I appreciate what you're doing. It's not harmful. I mean, I think that's a bit overblown. But I in fact think it is our responsibility, certainly as an educator, which is our job, not yours, to really toe the line on the most rigorous science-based information.
Well, look, I'm torn because if everyone says it's not my responsibility, then we perpetuate the current situation.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
At the same time, I just know we couldn't sell a product to new parents that was like that.
And I think you're right. And I think given the market that you're probably going to, and you probably are inhabiting, that's probably right. And again, I don't hold you responsible for it. That's a bit much.
Yeah,
that is a pretty heavy lift.
Well, we can work together to fix the awareness issue around organic.
I do, and I think. I think we should actually talk about how to do that together, because it's a tough job. I appreciate it. Look, you're in a very tough business. It's very competitive. There's other players in this arena out there, and I appreciate what you have to do, because the market you have is going to be wealthy, left side politically parents, right? I get it. I mean, I know many of them myself. Okay, so this is going to be a really tough challenge. So I mean, again, okay, I've identified your business challenge. What other challenges you guys have in the business?
So honestly, our biggest challenge is just that most people don't know that they should be feeding their baby allergenic foods early and frequently. I mean, when you talk about we can at least focus on babies with eczema, because that's the one I think everyone agrees that they need to, and they just don't know. Almost no parent of a baby with eczema knows that there's that link and knows how important early allergen introduction is. And often many of them perceive the opposite, because sometimes when your baby has eczema and you're feeding them allergenic foods, the eczema flares up. So they perceive the allergenic foods to be exacerbating the eczema, and then they often remove the allergenic foods as a way to diminish the eczema, because what they're worried about is the fact that their baby is itching all the time, which is a very valid concern, but then in essence, they're exacerbating the likelihood that their baby will get a food allergy. So for us, it's all about education. We feel like we have the best possible implementation method to make it as easy as possible for parents. We'll have a patent that will give us a defensible advantage against our competitors as being the easiest way of introducing allergenic foods. So for us, it's really about just making sure that everyone knows how important it is. Because if everyone knew that they needed to do it, there'd be enough that had trouble doing it at home that they would need a tool to make it easy. And we know we will have the best tool to make it easy. So that's education through a combination of different avenues. The first for us was working with doctors, because to your point, it's so important that we have the credibility from doctors. So that's why our medical advisory board is made up of the head of allergy from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, a former president of the American Academy of Allergy and Asthma. But it's also why when we first launched, we started working directly with pediatricians, and we now have over 350 pediatricians that recommend our product in their office. And they take the same approach I do, which is they're not telling their patients you have to use this product. They're telling them you have to do early allergen introduction. And if you have trouble, here's a product that can help make it easy. And they generally loved our product, not because we were giving them something new, but the opposite is because the guidelines are really vague. And if you show the guidelines to your doctor,
vague. Yeah, right. I've read them, and they're what do I do with this?
Exactly. So if you were a pediatrician who knows some about allergy, but that's not your specialty, you're handed these guidelines that say feed it to a baby at 4 months, but how much, how frequent, how is it light roast peanut or dark roast peanut, or there's all these things that matter a lot in the in the trials, but there's no guidance. So that's why doctors really have loved working with us, is that we just help make it easier. But we also saw that with pediatricians, there's just so much that goes on at those early visits that often this doesn't rise to the level of a topic of discussion, which is why people don't know about the guidelines yet. So we also do a lot of work direct to consumers. So through Facebook ads, we have a quiz where you can determine your baby's risk of developing a food allergy. So you plug in, yes, my baby has eczema, so we can help teach you that your baby is at a higher risk. So we have resources like that. That's one of the things that is really lacking is good educational content. So our medical board of advisors is like perfectly situated to make just great educational content. And I'm the kind of day-to-day leader of the company, but they're the ones who make the product design decisions and the educational content decisions, because we need to know that our product is evidence-based and that the way we're talking about it is evidence-based and supported by science. So
what's going to be your biggest challenge going forward?
So scaling education is really our biggest challenge, because we can educate people one at a time, but it's expensive. I mean, right now, we're not just educating them on our product. We're telling them that your baby's at risk, then it's okay, you can do something about it, but that thing can be kind of hard. Here's what it looks like. And then, we have a product. So I think we have a number of different opportunities for partnerships that can help us dramatically scale education. So that's where my focus is really on a day-to-day basis. So we're in partnership discussions, for example, with a number of different, bless you.
Sorry,
it's okay.
A peanut. Yeah.
So we're in partnership discussions with a number of different formula companies who want to, some want to invest in us, some want to license our IP and launch their own product, but all of which would help us grow awareness in the marketplace, and also just drive parents to know that they should prevent food allergies, as well as potentially create revenue streams for us. That's one avenue for potentially scaling awareness. Another that's really important for us is working with healthcare systems. Because while for us as a small business, it's not financially profitable to work one pediatrician at a time,
that's right. Scale it, yeah.
It makes much more sense at the health system scale. So we've been really lucky to have been selected by Advocate Aurora Healthcare System in Wisconsin and in Illinois for a partnership. They have 30,000 babies a year in their healthcare system, and we won a pitch competition there a couple weeks ago. So they're now looking at an investment as well as a partnership to fully integrate our information into their, hopefully into the workflow of their EMR, and to making sure that every baby with eczema gets educated. Every parent knows at least about food allergy prevention. We're still working through the details of what that looks like, but I'm flying to Wisconsin in 2 weeks to hopefully finalize some of the partnership details. And then we hope to not just then help in their system alone, we could help save, we think, 2,000 babies a year from developing food allergies. But then if we can do that and use that as a pilot to bring to Kaiser or other institutions that we've just had discussions with, who are all excited about the concept but want to wait to see further data develop on the topic. So I think working with health systems is really key for us. We also work with employers to scale education. So Snapchat offers us as a fully subsidized maternity benefit because they see good ROI from preventing food allergies. And also just that it's such a burden on parents when their child has a food allergy that our product is so cheap compared to what it costs them when one of their employees gets a food allergy. So that's one method we're testing. That's more in the pilot phase right now, but we already have about 30 to 50% of Snapchat's babies using our product. And
Snapchat's babies. I don't know if I've ever thought I'd hear that phrase, but okay.
Well, all their employees are growing up now, so they start having babies, right?
That's great. Okay.
And then the fourth that we're looking at is trying to find the right celebrity partnerships just to help grow awareness, because with 1 in 10 Americans having a food allergy, finding the right celebrity who wants to make it their personal mission to help prevent food allergies, just having that voice out there talking about it, just that by itself could help save thousands of kids every year from developing food allergies.
You obviously have really embraced being an entrepreneur. Obviously done it extraordinarily well, and I really want to congratulate you. What advice would you give to young people, to students who are having some thoughts, fears, whatever it might be? What do you tell them?
It's a great question. So, I think you have to first kind of know more about what you want, because it's tough. Like, look, I love it. It's a super exciting, role. I create things, and especially my current business, I'm creating something that's really helping people. I love it, but it's also really taxing in many ways, emotionally, physically, mentally, and it has to be something that you want. Now, look, I think when you're a student, you need to try lots of things, and that's how you know what you want. But I think I would just tell them not to be afraid to try, but also not to be afraid to decide it's the wrong thing. I think that, for me, like getting that early experience, like trying it, was fundamental. And that, if there's ways that they can find in their lives to try out the different things that they're interested in, whether it's entrepreneurship or, just an entirely different major, whatever it is, that I think that's a great way of exploring. I think for me, one of the lessons I think I've learned in doing this that has encouraged me to take more of that mentality of trying lots of diverse things is that I've seen a lot of the best ideas that have been implemented both in my business and in other businesses often come from other industries or other categories. Yeah. There's a great book called Strategic Intuition by William Dugan at Columbia that talks a lot about how some of the best ideas for what we think of as like dramatic innovation often come from things that are already being done in other categories. Okay, so right. I feel like it's just so important to experiment and get experience in lots of different areas, both because you might find something you love, but also because you might learn something which then you can take to your other category. So I know there's more of a question about entrepreneurship.
No. That's exactly right. How do you? I mean, one of the things that they ask a lot, and I have a good answer for, is, well, where do we get the money to do this? How do we get this? How do we bootstrap it? I mean, where do I get the initial funding? I mean, you guys, I think you said started with some medical supplies. So I presume they were sitting around someplace, but yep. Somebody had to buy them. And how do you get the initial capital to do this sort of thing?
So for us, I mean, we were lucky that we were both in a place where it was not a very capital intensive business and also where we didn't need to be making income. So, I mean, for us, right. Like we could afford to buy a pallet of latex gloves. It was like, $500. Right. We had some savings just personally ourselves. We had plenty to do that. And then we went door to door in his car selling them. So there was really, maybe $2,000 altogether because we had to make flyers and business cards and file some, documents with the state. But like really to actually get some experience of like what it took to run a business took very little, and now I think with tools to launch websites, I mean, look, you're not going to have an Amazon.com quality website for $2,000, but I think like there's ways to experiment and learn on the cheap. And I think that, that's really an important way to do it. Now, look, I think for our current business, we took VC funding. We've raised $2.4 million to date. I think there's plenty of businesses that you just can't do without serious funding. Yeah, right. So I think that's situation dependent, but especially when you're in like the early stages of exploring and learning what you like the idea that you would then go raise a lot of money, even if you could raise it from friends and family, I would like keep that powder dry for your next idea after you have some experience.
Right. Because they'll go with you no matter how dumb the idea is. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Like leave that money for later for your next idea. Right. But I think there's like, especially now with the different tools and technologies and platforms, there's so many ways to try and just do it that the worst thing you can do is fail. And I think that for me, that was like the best learning experiences were, I think you could like, now it's so easy to launch a website, try selling some things, see what customers' feedback is, talk to the customers. Right. And I think that would be the one thing that I would point out though, is that like most of the effort I think goes into like trying it and just taking that first step. But then you can't forget to try and learn along the way, because if you just only try and learn from your experience when you're done, it's too late to get a lot of the value out of it. So when you're launching a small business, even if you don't think it'll develop into your life-changing business, talking to your customers and getting a sense from them of like,
so that's really an important point, David. And I want Daniel, I'm sorry, and I want to follow it up. This marketing thing, this idea that you go to a marketing study, and I happen to agree with you totally that hanging around with your customers is absolutely better than anybody you can hire and do all of that consulting kind of stuff. So how did you learn? I mean, you were telling about your dental supply business. You hung around with dentists or dental hygienists. I mean, but you learned about that from that, yeah. Yeah,
I think back then also my business partner was the kind of sales, business development side of it. So he did a little bit more of the hanging out. Sure. I think in that period of my life, I had undervalued the personal relationship side of it, and I think I was not doing enough of that. I think that's one of the things that led me not to make some of the right strategic planning decisions.
So that brings up a really another question. How important is a network? How important is it to build a network and meet all these folks and be out there
critically talking? I think it is one of the most important things. First, it's one of the most important things I do on a day-to-day basis in my role at the company is to go out and talk to people. I think for a number of reasons. One is that regardless of the type of role they're in or the type of way they could be helpful to me, or whether I'm ready for their type of help or not, I've learned something from every single conversation I've had with someone who was like a smart person in their area. So I think that just goes back to like making sure when you're doing things to try and like think about what you're learning from it and then use what you're learning in a comprehensive way. So, I think that I've taken lots of meetings. Look, some meetings turn out not to be helpful. There's always people you meet that you never call again, but I can't tell you the number of times that people who I wouldn't have thought of that I had built relationships with years ago now come up in my life, or people I get introduced to who just want to chat about learning about my business, and they're a VC. We're not taking investment; they just want to learn. But it turns out they know the head of a healthcare system. I've just found that like meeting people from different backgrounds that have interesting points of view and are smart always is a benefit. And a lot of times it's a benefit immediately, and even more times it's a benefit, 5 years later when you don't expect it.
You don't expect it. It is, yeah.
Yeah, and this is like, LinkedIn gets sometimes like a little bit of a bad rap, but I feel like this is one of the things it's been really fundamentally helpful for is like as I'm searching out for connections to healthcare systems or connections to VCs, it turns out that people I worked with 5 years ago are now friends with the VP of the investment arm of the healthcare system or whatever it is. So I think both from like the leveraging the connections, but even more so from then leveraging the connections themselves, like what I've been able to learn from the smart marketers and the smart investors and the smart operators has just really been invaluable to me, even more so than I think what people typically think of is like they'll have someone to call to get them in to see X, Y, and Z person, which is helpful, and I think that's been a value, but by far the much bigger value has been from like what I've been able to drain from the brains of all the people I've
all those people,
all those people I was meeting.
Yeah, you really never know where your friends and helping people in the past is really going to come back and help you out. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and we really want to encourage our students, obviously, build that network. I mean, I really think having folks like you here, especially, it's really important. I mean, and I'm not just saying that. I think it's crucial that we meet people like yourself who are passionate, excited, experienced, and still really young. So, okay, congratulations on a great conversation. Any parting thoughts on? I mean, you've had a really. I want to say it's not your career. You're not done yet. You're way too young for that. But sort of the early stage. Parting advice. What have you learned? If you had to put the nugget together and talk to them at their commencement, what would you tell them you learned? What's the most important thing? I
think the most important thing would be, while it's important to have goals and to have very high aspirations, it's also very important to not be too set on a certain path. And that I think I've seen a lot of people in life who are very certain that they'll have a very specific path, and then they meet a lot of
I'm laughing.
Stress.
Yeah,
when they don't meet it.
Oh, yeah.
And instead, if you're always open to new things and always open to meeting people and learning about new opportunities and using that to build your current path, but also using that to learn about alternate paths, like I never would have believed I would have ended up either in dental supplies or in food allergy prevention. Like if you asked me what I've been involved with and what I should learn about, like no way would either of those been one of those topics. But I think by like not being quite as set on like exactly where I needed to be, and just being open to kind of like taking the right path, that there's an opportunity to really like take advantage of opportunities you wouldn't have otherwise, that you're otherwise kind of closed off to because you're so set on the like, this school to that business school to working at that firm to working at that firm, which can both lead to disappointment and also missed opportunities that might have ended up in a better place than you would have otherwise.
Just again, there's another last question.
Sure.
What in your education, either from undergraduate or graduate school, was the most useful?
Oh, well, I'm going to go see some teachers later today. So
you got to be careful. Yeah, they won't see this. They're not watching this. This is a secret. No one will ever know.
I mean, look, I loved Pomona. I loved everything that I did about it. Yeah. I think for me, like getting my hands on and like doing it in the real world was the most valuable experience in education. Yeah. And again, that's nothing against Pomona. I had really amazing teachers, but I think like that and a combination of both having that experience, and then I think for me, like one of the ways I've tried to open myself up to a lot of different ways of thinking is I think podcasts are a really amazing way where you can learn from a chemist and you can learn from a biologist. You can learn all these different ways of thinking that you can bring back to your life. So I know it's not as like a fundamental of isn't some cool podcast.
No, I think that's an answer that many successful people would say. It's not like I took a course in this and that really taught me how to do it. It's really about growing and thinking and having these experiences where you sort of are in a semi-constrained and semi-safe environment where you can experiment, have think thoughts, debate, argue, sort of be made uncomfortable. and a little bit stressed and move out into a new area.
Exactly.
I think that's part of education.
And you just never know where it'll go.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'll give you a very silly example, but like Econ Talk has been historically like one of my favorite podcasts.
Okay.
Russ Roberts is amazing.
Okay.
And he had William Dugan on talking about this book, Strategic Intuition. And I never would have told you, like, I listened to Econ Talk for like business advice. That's not really what it's for.
Right.
It's like, it was for me to exercise my econ major brain from Pomona. But like, I just ended up with like this really like life-changing book as far as like how I looked at like, approach to business, approach to life planning, things like that, that because I was like just kind of thinking about it more like constructively as like, how do I use this in my life? I think just led to kind of interesting insights that I could like, use right away. Okay.
So my really last question, I think.
The last.
The last. What do you look for in employees?
It's a good question. So I think,
and I'm looking for the answer because it's really an important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for every business, not for every business it's different. I think for us, it's just really important that they care a lot about our mission.
Okay.
Because for us, like, especially at a startups are going to be difficult, crazy. You're going to wear a million hats that you didn't think you were going to wear. You're going to be asked to do things that you may not want to do.
How many employees do you have now?
7.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, we know we're not only building a great business, but we're out there to save thousands of kids from developing food allergies. So when you're there stuck on Sunday night working late or whatever, like, we have like a poster on our wall of like my nephew with food allergies and his younger sister who used our product and now doesn't have food allergies. So I think like we really try and keep, bring people in who really care in and believe in what we're doing. And then make sure that it's also kept part of our culture that they really, believe in it. And keep wanting to do things to help people, because I think you get people then that just go like above and beyond to want to get their job done in the right way.
Do we have any questions? Okay, we don't.
No last.
Daniel, thank you. I will say it doesn't need a summary. I think you've done a fabulous job, but I will say that your passion, your expertise, your experience, I would invest in you and the concept. So thank you so much. It's been really wonderful, and we really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.